Alright, this video is kind of part 2 in a series. As you might expect, the first part is my video on Fargo Season 1. It discusses some concepts found within the Coen brothers' filmography that I feel are necessary to know before diving into this video. So, please, if you haven't watched my video on Season 1 yet, go do that. At the very least, watch the first half of it. Oh, and obviously, if you haven't seen Fargo Season 2, it's one of the greatest seasons of any TV show ever. So, for the love of God, watch that. Do not spoil it on this video. Now, like many of the Coens films, and of course, like the first season of this show, the concepts of absurdism and cosmic irony are at the core of Fargo Season 2. The absurdism is obvious. Characters even discuss the author Camus.
Oh, hey. I read that
Oh, yeah?
last year. It's pretty depressing.
Really? See, I think it's beautiful.
It's the rock we all push. Men. We call it our burden, but it's really our privilege.
One of the season's episodes is named after the myth of Sisyphus, and another is named The Castle, which I believe is a reference to the Kafka novel that is also considered to be absurdist. But beyond the direct references, just look at the story. It's the definition of absurdism. The characters are thrown down violent, unpredictable paths that must seem pointless to them. The characters stumble through this story, being defined not by learning or growing, but by failing to communicate, by being completely incapable of understanding each other and even their surroundings. And spurring all of this on is an alien ship in the sky. In Episode 1, its mysterious, awe-inspiring light lures Rye Gearhart into the road, causing him to be hit by Peggy, thus igniting the entire story of the season to follow. And near the end of the season, the UFO appears above the climactic shootout where many of the characters are fighting for their lives. And because this ship allows itself to be seen, the main characters reach the end of their stories. The protagonist of the story, Lou Salverson, is able to escape death and defeat his enemy. Ed and Peggy are able to flee their pursuer, Hansi. These aliens, or whatever they are, caused this story to happen, and then decided how it would end. This idea isn't shown in just these two scenes, though. There are other clues. Look at the overhead shots spying on the characters below. Usually when something violent, dramatic, story-changing is happening, these characters are being watched and controlled. However, this season is not a commentary on aliens or UFOs. It's not about UFOs at all, really. It's about cosmic irony. The spaceship is symbolic. It's the physical manifestation of fate. I'm not saying that the ship doesn't exist in the universe of the show. It does. The UFO is not a hallucination. There's nothing psychological going on here. There is a glowing blue physical object above the characters, and what that object undoubtedly is a spaceship. But what it is doesn't matter. What matters is what it represents. Fate. This is what Fargo Season 2 is about. It's about the characters of the show not being in control of their story. They are trapped within stories, fated to occur in the way those floating above see fit. The spaceship, and its bright, beaming blue light, is this concept personified. But before diving any further into fate and fake stories and this shiny blue light, I want to discuss another major theme in this season, if not the definitive theme: the failure of communication. Most characters in this story are completely incapable of understanding each other, of communication in general. To start with the obvious, the main antagonist, Hansi, speaks rarely. He's nearly mute, a silent killer. He spends much of the story being scolded and bossed around by the Gearhart family, but rarely saying much himself. Peggy and Ed Blomquist have a marriage that's doomed to fail because of this breakdown of communication. Ed wants to have kids and stay settled down in their small town, while Peggy, who's being basically indoctrinated by her feminist boss at work, wants to move away, wants to leave him and head to California. Both of them only consider their own desires, with no concern or understanding of the other. Rye Gearhart lacks the confidence to ever get his point across. He ends up overcompensating when the judge refuses to listen to him. His brothers Dodd and Bear are equally ineffectual at communicating, both in their own way. Dodd is an impulsive, stupid, bullheaded misogynist. and Bear can barely speak, barely express himself. Their mother, Floyd, fails at controlling them, and their father, Otto, doesn't even have a chance. In the first episode, he has a stroke, making him literally incapable of talking. And with Otto unable to talk and there being a power vacuum in the family, there's no way for them to know who should be in charge of the business. The characters fail to understand each other, and when communication breaks down, violence follows. Even Mike Milligan, for as much as he speaks and as eloquent as his words may be, he still gets nothing across to the people who hear him. He speaks in only quotes and riddles. It's like he's only talking to hear his own voice. He is a salesman, a climber, a politician. And of course, this leads me to Ronald Reagan, the president known as the Great Communicator. But like this season shows, Reagan was an actor. His speeches sound nice, but there's no real soul to them. This can be seen when he asks Lou about his military service in the bathroom after the speech. Lou tells Reagan a little bit about his experience in Vietnam, and Reagan acts like he knows exactly what he went through by discussing his own struggle of being in a war movie. The Kitchen brothers are literally mute, and then there's the deaf child at the end, who grow up to be the hitmen from Fargo in the first season. So you see that the theme of confusion, of the breakdown of communication, fills every moment of this season. Some clues to this are more obvious than others. We see Dodd and Hansi torturing this man.
Are you listening to me? Is he listening to me?
Cut off his ears.
Near the end of the movie, the police turn off their radios before the massacre at the hotel, and because of this, Lou can't contact them and tell them about the ambush that's coming their way. Lou shoots off Bear's ear right before their climactic fight, or how the show ends with Hank telling his family about his new language of symbols he's been making. Even Lou and his wife Betsy, who for the most part are the only characters who don't completely fail at communicating, even they struggle. For one, Lou can't really come to terms with his wife's likely death of cancer, and the two of them are left in constant confusion over her fate. They elect to be part of a trial for an experimental cancer medication, but they have no idea if she's getting the real drug or the placebo. She is the hamster in that cage behind the doctor, unaware of what her fate holds, yet trapped in it. Even though the doctor is right in front of them with all the answers, they still can't get the answers they need from him. They are left in confusion, totally ignorant as to what fate has in store for her. This is like the bamboozlement the characters feel when seeing the UFO for the first time. A loss for words, unaware that what they are seeing is in total control of them. The UFO is deciding their fates. And I think the show's main clue to this is its usage of the color blue. In particular, a blue light that looks just like the UFOs. It seems whenever something important in the show is happening, something ironic or something striking, a light in a shade of blue identical to the spaceships is shown. I think the UFO represents the force that's spurring the story along. It represents cosmic irony and deterministic fate. Much like the writer of this show, the UFO is deciding what happens to these characters. It is pushing them along the path that it wants to watch. The color that represents this force, showing itself in the places it does, is this show's clue to this. This blue light first shows up in the first episode when Rye arrives at the diner. There is a prog rock song playing about UFOs, and this shade of blue shows itself in different spots all around the diner, even the clothing of the waitress. After the shootout, Rye sees the UFO, calling him out into the street. Peggy hits him with her car, and from this point on, the color pops up throughout the rest of the season. Like when Ed and Peggy hide Rye's body, the light from the freezer beams over their faces and over Rye, much like it did moments before from the ship itself. It's in the butcher shop when Ed disposes of the body. It's in the payphone when Ed tries to contact the Gearedhearts. When the characters move along their fated paths, the light finds a way to shine over them. But the color isn't always a light. It's the color of the box holding the severed head. It's all over the motel where the massacre occurs. It decorates many interiors, too. So many walls in this show are painted this blue. Not all are the exact shade of blue of the spaceship, that would be obvious, but plenty still are. This color is everywhere. Seriously, go back and watch this season again and pay attention for this shade of blue. You will be amazed at how often it shows up. But still, there's more. The vehicles the Gearharts drive are blue. Skip's car is blue. Ed's car is blue. And of course, Peggy's car, the one that hits Rye, is quite literally the same exact color as the UFO he was distracted by. The little lines on the wall are written in blue. These lines that document the growth of Floyd's children. In this shot, this color is about time, about trajectory.
Where's this miracle contraption?
Behold the future.
And when Mike Milligan does his job, fulfills his role, another typewriter of the same color is on his desk. Like the screenwriters of this story controlling the events in the script, this color of blue determines the character's fate. And just for a second, let's go back to this typewriter, because it symbolizes a lot more than you think. Notice how the title and the opening text is in typewriter font, unlike any of the other seasons. It's one of the show's self-aware ways of admitting that it is a story. Like this guy that Lou talks to, he says that the flying saucers only appear on the odd days. And in the show that this scene is taking place in, the UFOs only appear in odd episodes, episodes 1 and 9. It's as if this story is self-aware. Episode 9 even begins by showing the season of the show to be a story within a big blue book. Stories within stories. Peggy watches an old Ronald Reagan film in which a man and a woman get trapped in a burning room, a situation that she hallucinates herself inside of during the final episode when she finds herself in a situation similar to the movie. And of course, the glow of the television she's watching the movie on is that color of blue, much like the glow of light in the situation she later finds herself in. She imagines herself inside a movie. It's about stories within stories. The season begins with a shot from an old movie set, an old Ronald Reagan movie. And this movie is about the Sioux Falls Massacre, a massacre that the characters in the show acknowledge, only to take part in another new massacre in the same exact town. Stories replicate reality, and reality replicates stories. But which ones are which? Are these characters acting on their own, or are they actors on a cosmic stage? The color blue in this season suggests the latter. But blue isn't all that's important here. What about red? Now, red doesn't show up like blue does in this show, but it does play a part, mostly in how it's shown around specific characters and how it contrasts with all of the blue. Many of the characters are dressed in lots of blue and or lots of red. No, I'm not saying this always means something every time, but in general, I think it does. Blue, of course, represents fate. So when characters wear it, it's usually during a time when they're doing what's required of them to further the plot, during times that are heavy in cosmic irony. Betsy happens to find the handgun buried in the snow at the crime scene. Charlie enters the butcher shop just for a ricochet bullet to graze his head. It's both a freak accident for occurring and a miracle for not killing him. The wounded waitress runs out of the diner, forcing Rye to follow and therefore see the UFO. The characters in blue act, or are commanded, in service of the plot. But now let's look at some of the characters in red. They are the opposite of those in blue. They are in command of their own actions and of those around them, or at least they seem to be. The clearest example of this is the main character, Detective Lou Solverson. Do you get it? His last name, Solverson, because he solves cases. Anyway, Lou wears red throughout the entire show. It's the only police uniform I've ever seen that's red, and his car is the same color. Now, none of the other cops wear red. They are either brown or in the classic blue. This shot of Lou and Ben perfectly shows this dichotomy. These characters are complete opposite. Lou is in control. He is perceptive. He acts as he sees fit. Ben just wants to go through the motions. He doesn't want to make waves or cause any disturbances. He only wants to walk the path that's expected of him. Red is for those with real authority, real control. Look at the sheriff's building, or Ed and Peggy's house before Peggy's accident forced them to flee it. When Ed and Peggy decide to fake a car accident, to take matters into their own hands, their blue car is being towed away by a red truck. Hansi drives a blue truck for most of the season. But after being ordered around and disrespected for so long by the Gearharts, he decides to betray them. After killing Dodd, he ditches his blue truck and steals a red car, completing his transition from a servant into a man of action. But many characters aren't as clear-cut as Ben or Lou. They don't have arcs as obvious as Hansi. They dabble in both blue and red. Like real people, they are indecisive. They are in control in some moments, yet powerless in others. This sequence of Betsy is my favorite example of this duality, and honestly, it's probably the best piece of evidence for my red and blue theory. So, we fade from black to a bridge, which then fades into a shot of her sitting in a hospital, being treated for cancer. She doesn't know if she's going to live or die. To her, her fate is completely unknown. Later, she finds herself in even more of a limbo, unaware if she's even taking real medication or not. Now let's go back and look at that hospital sequence again, but let's really look close at it. We see a large bridge that's the exact color of the UFO's light. This blue bridge stretching to the other side could represent death. You know, like the sky, the big blue bus. Her fate could be death. Maybe she isn't crossing this bridge, but she's at least seeing it. This is the important shot, though. Look close. You see it? On one side of her, there's a red chair. On the other, a blue. This is her in limbo, unaware if she's going to cross that blue bridge, yet still being aware that the bridge exists. She is stuck between knowing and not knowing, in between fate and decision. This shot right here is my favorite in the entire season. And more than this, I think it's proof of much of what this video theorizes. Now, there are many more examples of blue and red symbolizing these concepts, but this video is already long enough. And there are so many other themes in this season that I could have brought up, but I tried to focus on the stuff that I thought was the most important. You know, there's so much social commentary too, all of the pop cultural references, the references to other mediums, but then again, in my eyes, these felt at least partially related to the stories within stories concept that Fargo has going on. But then I also think the show is about the death of the Western. The Western movie star becomes president, and the cops who play by the Western movie rules are wiped out. And honestly, it's about a lot more than just the death of the Western. It shows an era where much of the old-fashioned was wiped out. Old replacing new is a major theme. Like the Native Americans who were wiped out before, anything off the grid that's failing to communicate with the rest of society is torn down and replaced. The old style of the criminal is torn down by the corporate kind. The nuclear family is torn down by the feminist. Running out was the time of the mom and pop stores lining the small, quiet towns of the American Midwest. Remember, this is during the gas shortage, the late 70s. The years that are known as the beginning of the American economic decline. Wages stagnated. People lost faith in institutions. With Reagan on one TV channel and the daily crime horror show on the next, this is the time when America became a different place. So, rather than dare to unpack all of these themes and social commentaries, I just tried to make this video about unpacking the philosophical. Much like when I watched the Coens films, the questions this season of Fargo forces me to ask the most are about fate. And in my opinion, the UFO and the blue light that shines down from it is the main way this season accomplishes this. Oh, God, this video was long. Okay, if any of you made it this far, then wow, thanks. Really appreciate it. If you like this video, then you might like some of these on the screen. And if you're not subscribed, then please do that, because I'll have another video on Fargo Season 3 coming. So if you subscribe and hit the little bell, the notification thing, you'll get a notification when it comes out. So, okay, thanks. Bye.